The most dangerous secret in the world was not the one people tried to hide from others. It was the one they could never hide from themselves. Nathaniel Hayes had spent his entire life hearing those secrets. Every unspoken fear, every hidden ambition, every thought people buried behind polite smiles. As the CEO of Hayes Corporation, he stood at the top of a world built on success, influence, and perfection. People saw a man who had everything: a powerful company, endless resources, a reputation that made executives choose their words carefully around him. But no one knew the truth behind his calm expression. Nathaniel could hear every thought around him. The ability appeared when he was young, and over time, it became the invisible wall separating him from everyone else. He knew when someone wanted something from him. He knew when compliments were fake. He knew when people smiled while secretly judging him. The world became predictable, but it also became unbearably lonely. That was why Nathaniel stopped searching for genuine connections. It was easier to keep people at a distance when he already knew what they truly thought. Until the day Ethan Carter walked into his office. Ethan was 26 years old, a young assistant recently transferred to the executive department. Unlike the confident executives who entered Nathaniel's office with carefully prepared words, Ethan looked like someone trying very hard not to make a mistake. He held a folder against his chest, checked his notes one last time, and quietly took a breath before knocking. "Come in," Nathaniel said. Ethan stepped inside. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. I am Ethan Carter from the executive support team. It is a pleasure to meet you." His voice was professional and respectful. But then Nathaniel heard the thought behind those words. "Please do not forget what you wanted to say. Please do not embarrass yourself in front of the CEO. Why does this office feel like it is 100 degrees warmer than everywhere else?" Nathaniel looked at him carefully. For the first time in years, a thought made him almost smile. Not because Ethan was nervous. Many people were nervous around him. It was because Ethan's thoughts were completely different from everyone else's. There was no calculation, no hidden plan, no desire to gain something from the CEO, just honesty. During the meeting, Ethan presented the project notes and explained the details clearly. Nathaniel listened to every word, but what interested him most was what Ethan never said aloud. Ethan was worried about whether his work would help the team. He was thinking about whether his coworkers had enough support. He was hoping the project would succeed because everyone had worked hard. Not once did Ethan think about using the opportunity for personal gain. Then Nathaniel heard something that made him pause. "I wonder if anyone ever asks how he is doing." Nathaniel looked up from the documents. Ethan was focused on the presentation, unaware that his private thought had reached the one person who could hear it. For years, Nathaniel had heard people talk about his company, his money, and his position. No one cared about the person behind the title. But Ethan had somehow thought about the one thing Nathaniel never expected anyone to notice: him. When the meeting ended, Ethan gathered his folder and thanked everyone before leaving. Nathaniel watched him walk away, confused by the feeling that remained. He had spent years using his ability to discover what people wanted from him. But this time was different. He did not want to know what Ethan wanted. He wanted to know why someone who barely knew him had already seen the part of him that everyone else ignored. And for the first time in a very long time, Nathaniel Hayes was curious about someone not because of what he could hear, but because of what he hoped that person would choose to say. After meeting Ethan Carter, Nathaniel Hayes found himself paying attention to something he had spent years ignoring. Not the numbers in a report, not the opinions of executives, not the endless thoughts of people trying to impress him. He was paying attention to one person who never seemed to realize how different he was. Ethan continued his work at Hayes Corporation like any other employee. He arrived early, organized his schedule, and quietly helped everyone around him. To the rest of the company, Ethan was simply a reliable assistant. But to Nathaniel, he was something completely unexpected. He was proof that honesty still existed in a world full of hidden intentions. Every morning, Nathaniel walked through the executive floor and heard countless thoughts. Some employees worried about deadlines. Some hoped for promotions. Some wondered how they could get closer to the CEO. Then there was Ethan. Did everyone receive the information they needed for the meeting? I hope the new team members feel comfortable asking questions. Maybe I should check if anyone needs help before lunch. Nathaniel would hear these thoughts and stop for a moment. Ethan never thought about how he could benefit from helping others. He simply cared. That was what made him impossible to ignore. A few days later, Nathaniel reviewed the progress of an important company project. The executive team had prepared several strategies, but something felt incomplete. During the meeting, Ethan stood quietly near the presentation screen, taking notes. Nathaniel could hear the uncertainty in his thoughts. Should I say something? Everyone here has more experience than me. Maybe my idea is not important enough. Nathaniel looked toward him. Ethan, what is your opinion? The room became quiet. Ethan looked surprised that the CEO had asked him directly. I think the strategy is strong, Ethan said carefully, but maybe we should focus more on how customers feel about the message. Nathaniel listened as Ethan explained his idea. It was simple, but it changed the direction of the discussion. Instead of focusing only on results, Ethan wanted the company to create something people could connect with. The executives considered his suggestion, and Nathaniel noticed the difference immediately. Ethan was not trying to prove he was smarter than anyone else. He was trying to make the work better. After the meeting ended, several team members thanked Ethan for his contribution. Ethan smiled, but Nathaniel heard the thought behind it. I cannot believe they actually listened to me. I hope I can continue helping this team. Nathaniel watched him leave the conference room. He realized Ethan had no idea how valuable he was. That evening, Nathaniel remained in his office long after the building became quiet. The city lights reflected against the windows, but his attention was somewhere else. For years, he believed his ability gave him an advantage. It allowed him to understand people faster than anyone else. But Ethan was teaching him something different. Understanding someone was not just about hearing what they thought. It was about noticing what they did when nobody was watching. The next morning, Nathaniel made a decision. He assigned Ethan to a special executive project that required direct collaboration with his office. The announcement surprised many employees. Ethan was talented, but he was still new compared to the experienced executives around him. When Ethan received the message, Nathaniel heard the immediate concern in his thoughts. Why would the CEO choose me? Did I make a mistake? Nathaniel looked at the message on his screen and paused. He wanted to tell Ethan the truth. He wanted to explain that this decision was not about a mistake or a business calculation. Ethan was chosen because he was the first person in years who made Nathaniel feel like he was more than just a title. But Nathaniel remained silent. For the first time, he wanted someone to understand him without needing to hear every hidden thought. And that was a feeling Nathaniel Hayes had never experienced before. The first thing Ethan Carter noticed about working directly with Nathaniel Hayes was that the CEO was not what everyone expected. People inside Hayes Corporation described Nathaniel as distant, serious, and almost impossible to approach. They believed every decision he made was based only on numbers and business strategy. But Ethan began seeing something different. He noticed the small moments that nobody else paid attention to. Nathaniel stayed late to review projects that affected employees. He listened carefully during meetings instead of simply giving orders. He remembered details that most leaders would forget. The more Ethan worked beside him, the more he wondered why someone who seemed to have everything still looked like he was carrying an invisible weight. Nathaniel, meanwhile, was discovering something equally unexpected. For the first time in years, he was not interested in hearing someone's thoughts because he wanted information. He wanted to understand Ethan because he genuinely wanted to know him. The special executive project brought them closer every day. They spent hours reviewing plans, discussing ideas, and solving problems together. Ethan slowly became more comfortable around Nathaniel, but he still had moments of doubt. During one afternoon meeting, Ethan presented a new approach for the project. He explained his ideas clearly, but Nathaniel could hear the thoughts behind his confident voice. I hope this makes sense. I hope they do not think I am wasting their time. Nathaniel watched him carefully. Years ago, he would have used that information to predict the outcome of the meeting. Now, he wanted Ethan to realize his own value. That is a strong idea, Nathaniel said. Ethan looked surprised. Really? Nathaniel nodded. Yes. You should trust your own judgment more. Ethan smiled slightly. I will try. Nathaniel heard the thought that followed. I cannot believe the CEO actually believes in me. The simple honesty of that thought stayed with him. Later that evening, Ethan and Nathaniel continued working in the executive office. The city outside the windows was covered in warm evening lights. The quiet atmosphere made the huge office feel less intimidating than before. Ethan looked through the project files and noticed something. You know, everyone here seems to think you always know exactly what to do. Nathaniel looked at him. Do they? Ethan nodded. Yes. They think you never hesitate. Nathaniel almost laughed. If only they knew. He had spent years pretending he was always certain because it was easier than admitting how exhausting his ability could be. Then Ethan said something unexpected. But I think you probably think about things more than anyone else. Nathaniel became silent. He had heard thousands of thoughts about himself, but that simple observation felt different. Ethan was not afraid of him. He was not trying to impress him. He was simply trying to understand him. Why do you think that? Nathaniel asked. Ethan shrugged. Because people who care about doing things right usually think the most. Nathaniel looked away for a moment. He did not want Ethan to see how much those words affected him. The next day, a challenge appeared within the project. A few senior team members questioned whether Ethan's ideas were suitable for such an important campaign. Ethan remained professional, but Nathaniel heard the doubt returning. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am not experienced enough. Before Ethan could step back, Nathaniel supported his proposal and asked the team to consider the results instead of the person presenting the idea. The discussion changed immediately. After the meeting, Ethan thanked him. You did not have to do that. Nathaniel looked at him. Yes, I did. Ethan smiled. Why? For a moment, Nathaniel almost answered with the truth. Because I know what you think. Because I know how hard you try. Because you are different from everyone else. But instead, he simply said, because your idea deserved to be heard. Ethan walked away with a grateful smile. Nathaniel watched him leave and realized something important. His ability had always allowed him to hear what people hid. But Ethan was teaching him how to notice what people showed without saying anything. And that lesson was becoming more valuable than any secret he had ever discovered. As Ethan Carter became more involved in the executive project, he slowly realized that Nathaniel Hayes was not just a powerful CEO surrounded by luxury and success. He was a person who had spent years standing alone at the top. The more time they spent together, the more Ethan noticed the small things that revealed the truth behind Nathaniel's perfect image. The CEO always arrived before everyone else. He reviewed every detail personally. He carried the responsibility of thousands of employees without ever showing how much pressure he felt. Most people saw confidence. Ethan saw someone who rarely allowed himself to rest. Nathaniel noticed Ethan's attention to those details. Through years of hearing thoughts, he had become used to people focusing on what they could gain from him. But Ethan focused on what he could give. That difference continued to surprise him. The special project reached an important stage, and the team needed to prepare for a major presentation with one of the company's biggest partners. Ethan worked harder than ever, reviewing documents, improving ideas, and making sure every member of the team had what they needed. Nathaniel watched from his office as Ethan moved through the busy workplace. He could hear the thoughts of everyone around them, but Ethan's voice was always different. I hope the team feels confident tomorrow. I hope everyone knows their effort matters. Nathaniel paused. Even before the presentation succeeded, Ethan was already thinking about everyone else. The day before the event, Nathaniel and Ethan stayed late in the office to finalize the details. The lights of the city reflected across the glass walls, creating a quiet atmosphere above the streets. Ethan looked through the final presentation and suddenly asked, "Can I ask you something?" Nathaniel looked up from his documents. Of course. Ethan hesitated. Do you ever get tired of being the person everyone depends on? The question surprised Nathaniel. Usually, people asked about business decisions, company growth, or future plans. No one asked about him. Before Nathaniel could answer, he heard Ethan's thought. Maybe that was too personal. I should not have asked. Nathaniel looked at him. No. It was a good question. Ethan smiled. I just think people forget that leaders are people too. Nathaniel became quiet. Those words felt different because Ethan chose to say them. They were not a hidden thought. They were something Ethan wanted him to know. The next morning, the presentation began. Ethan stood beside Nathaniel in front of the partner team, looking nervous but prepared. Nathaniel could hear the uncertainty in his mind. Stay calm. You know this. You worked hard for this moment. But as Ethan started speaking, his confidence grew. He explained the strategy clearly, answered questions thoughtfully, and showed the same sincerity that had caught Nathaniel's attention from the beginning. After the presentation ended successfully, the team celebrated the results. Ethan smiled, but Nathaniel heard the thought behind it. I cannot believe I actually did that. Maybe I really belong here. Nathaniel looked at him and felt something unexpected. Pride. Not the pride of a CEO watching an employee succeed. Something deeper. He was happy because Ethan finally saw himself the way others saw him. Later that evening, Nathaniel remained in his office after everyone had left. He thought about how different his life felt since Ethan arrived. His ability had always given him access to hidden emotions, but Ethan was showing him something more important. A person could reveal themselves through kindness, patience, and the choices they made every day. The next morning, Nathaniel made a decision. He would ask Ethan to become his direct partner for the final stage of the project. It was a professional decision. At least, that was what he told himself. But deep inside, Nathaniel knew the truth. He wanted Ethan close because the young assistant had become the first person who made his world feel less empty. And for someone who had spent years hearing everything, that feeling was the one thing he never wanted to lose. For years, Nathaniel Hayes believed that knowing every hidden thought around him was the closest thing to understanding people. He could hear doubts before they became words, recognize false intentions before they became actions, and predict decisions before they were made. But after Ethan Carter entered his life, Nathaniel began to question everything he once believed. The young assistant did not make him feel powerful. He made him feel human. The final stage of the executive project brought them closer than ever. They spent long hours reviewing strategies, preparing presentations, and discussing ideas that went beyond business. Ethan had become comfortable enough to speak honestly with Nathaniel, but there were still moments when he underestimated himself. Nathaniel noticed every time. One afternoon, Ethan presented a new concept for the company's upcoming campaign. The idea was thoughtful and focused on creating a stronger emotional connection with customers. The executives listened carefully, but Nathaniel could hear Ethan's uncertainty. Beneath his calm expression, "I hope they understand what I mean. I hope they do not think this idea is too simple." Nathaniel looked around the room. He saw experienced leaders with years of success, but Ethan's perspective brought something different. It was not based only on numbers. It was based on understanding people. "This direction has potential," Nathaniel said. "Let us develop it further." After the meeting, Ethan walked beside him toward the elevator. "Thank you for supporting my idea," Ethan said. Nathaniel looked at him. "You did not need my support. Your idea was already strong." Ethan smiled. "You always say things like that." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like you believe in me more than I believe in myself." The words surprised him, not because they were untrue, but because Ethan had recognized something Nathaniel had never admitted. Nathaniel had spent his life hearing everyone else's thoughts, yet Ethan was beginning to understand him without any special ability. That evening, the office became quiet. Nathaniel sat alone at his desk reviewing the campaign materials. The city lights outside reflected against the window, but his mind was focused on Ethan. Then he heard a thought from across the room. Ethan had returned to collect a forgotten notebook. Nathaniel heard it accidentally. "I wonder if someone like him could ever understand what it feels like to be invisible." Nathaniel froze. He knew immediately that Ethan was not talking about him. Ethan was thinking about himself. For the first time, Nathaniel understood that Ethan's confidence was only a small part of the story. Behind the kindness and dedication was someone who had spent years wondering whether he was important enough to be chosen. The thought stayed with Nathaniel long after Ethan left, because he understood that feeling. People saw Nathaniel as a successful CEO, but they rarely saw the person behind the position. They saw achievements, not sacrifices. They saw authority, not loneliness. The difference was that Nathaniel had built walls around himself, while Ethan had spent years trying to prove he deserved a place in the world. The next day, Nathaniel asked Ethan to join him for a private conversation. "I want to ask you something," Nathaniel said. Ethan looked curious. "What is it?" Nathaniel paused. He wanted to explain everything. He wanted to tell Ethan that he understood the thoughts he tried to hide. But instead, he asked a different question. "Why do you always work so hard for people who may never notice?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Because everyone deserves to feel like their effort matters." Nathaniel became silent. That answer was exactly why Ethan was different. He did not help others because he expected something in return. He did it because it was part of who he was. Later that evening, Nathaniel stood alone in his office and realized something important. He no longer wanted to hear Ethan's thoughts because he wanted access to his secrets. He wanted to know him because he wanted to protect the trust they were building. But there was one thought from Ethan that Nathaniel could not forget. A quiet hope that someone would choose him simply because he was himself. And for the first time, Nathaniel Hayes wanted to be the person who made that hope come true. The day Nathaniel Hayes decided to reveal his secret to Ethan Carter was the day he realized something important. For the first time in his life, he was not afraid of someone knowing the truth. He had spent years hiding his ability because he believed people would only see the difference between them. He believed they would focus on the power instead of the person. But Ethan had already proven that he was different. He did not care about Nathaniel's position. He cared about Nathaniel himself. The decision stayed on Nathaniel's mind throughout the week. He continued working with Ethan on the final stage of the project, but every conversation felt different. There was a truth between them that had not been spoken yet. One evening, after most employees had left Hayes Corporation, Nathaniel asked Ethan to meet him in his private office. Ethan entered with a curious expression. "Is something wrong with the project?" he asked. Nathaniel shook his head. "No, this is about something else." Ethan sat down and waited. Nathaniel stood near the window overlooking the city. For a moment, the powerful CEO who could handle any business challenge struggled to find the right words. "There is something about me that I have never shared with anyone here." Ethan listened carefully. Nathaniel took a deep breath. "I can hear people's thoughts." The room became quiet. Ethan looked surprised, trying to understand the meaning behind the confession. Nathaniel continued. "I hear what people think, but do not say. I know their fears, their doubts, and their intentions." He looked down. "For a long time, I thought it was a gift. But eventually, it became something that separated me from everyone else." Ethan did not immediately respond. Nathaniel expected questions. He expected fear. Instead, Ethan asked the one thing he never expected. "Does it get lonely?" Nathaniel looked at him. The question was simple, but it reached deeper than anything else. "Yes," Nathaniel admitted. Ethan looked at him with understanding. "Because you hear everyone, but nobody knows what you are feeling." Nathaniel stayed silent. He had heard thousands of thoughts in his life, but Ethan was the first person who understood the weight behind them without needing to experience it himself. "So you know everything people think about you?" Ethan asked. Nathaniel nodded. "Sometimes." Ethan looked thoughtful. "That sounds exhausting." Nathaniel almost smiled. Most people would have been fascinated by the ability. Ethan was thinking about the person carrying it. "You are not angry?" Nathaniel asked. Ethan shook his head. "No. I think I am more surprised that you carried something like that alone for so long." Those words changed something inside Nathaniel. He had spent years believing his ability made him different from everyone else. But Ethan made him realize the ability was not the reason he felt alone. The reason was that he never allowed anyone close enough to understand him. They continued talking for hours. Nathaniel explained how difficult it was to separate genuine feelings from passing thoughts. Ethan shared how he often questioned whether he was good enough and whether people truly valued him. Neither of them tried to fix the other. They simply listened. For the first time, Nathaniel experienced a conversation where he did not need his ability. He did not need hidden thoughts. He did not need to search for the truth. Ethan was giving it willingly. When Ethan finally left the office, Nathaniel remained by the window. The city below looked the same, but his perspective had changed. He had spent years believing that hearing every thought made him understand people better. Now he realized something else. The most meaningful truths were not always the ones people accidentally revealed. They were the ones they trusted someone enough to share. And Ethan Carter had just given him something more valuable than any secret. He had given him trust. After revealing his secret to Ethan Carter, Nathaniel Hayes expected their relationship to become more complicated. He thought Ethan might become uncomfortable around him. He thought every conversation would feel different because Ethan now knew the truth about the ability that had shaped Nathaniel's entire life. But Ethan surprised him once again. The next morning, Ethan walked into Hayes Corporation with the same calm expression, the same organized notes, and the same genuine attitude he always had. He did not treat Nathaniel like someone dangerous or unusual. He treated him like a person. That simple choice meant more than Ethan realized. Nathaniel had spent years hearing what people truly thought of him. He knew when someone respected his position, but not him. He knew when someone admired his success, but not the person behind it. With Ethan, everything felt different. There was no fear, no hidden desire for advantage, just trust. The final stage of the project became busier, and the entire team prepared for the official launch. Ethan and Nathaniel worked closely together, but their communication had changed. Ethan no longer worried about every word he said. Nathaniel no longer searched for every hidden thought. They were learning to build a connection through honest conversations. One afternoon, while reviewing the final details, Ethan noticed Nathaniel looking unusually quiet. "Are you thinking about the project?" Ethan asked. Nathaniel looked up. "Not exactly." Ethan smiled. "Slightly. That sounds like something you would normally not admit." Nathaniel almost laughed. Months earlier, he would have avoided the conversation. Now he allowed himself to be honest. "I am still learning how to be around people without depending on what I can hear." Ethan looked thoughtful. "Maybe that is a good thing." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Ethan answered. "Because sometimes people need the chance to surprise you." The word stayed with Nathaniel. He realized Ethan was right. His ability had always helped him avoid uncertainty. But uncertainty was also part of every meaningful relationship. Without it, there was no trust. During the launch presentation, Ethan stood beside Nathaniel in front of the company leaders and business partners. He looked confident, but Nathaniel knew there was still a small part of him that worried. "I hope I represent the team well. I hope everyone sees how much work we put into this." Nathaniel smiled quietly. Ethan was still the same person. Even after gaining more confidence, he still cared about others before himself. The presentation was a success. The campaign received positive feedback, and the team celebrated the achievement. After everyone left, Ethan and Nathaniel stood together near the office entrance. "You know," Ethan said, "a few months ago, I never imagined I would be standing here." Nathaniel looked at him. "Why not?" Ethan smiled. "Because people like you seemed impossible to reach." Nathaniel looked away for a moment. "And now?" Ethan thought before answering. "Now I think you were never impossible to reach. You were just waiting for someone to see you." Nathaniel felt the weight of those words. Ethan had no idea how deeply they affected him. Later that night, Nathaniel returned to his office and noticed something unusual. The constant flow of thoughts around him felt quieter than before. At first, he thought he was simply tired. But then he noticed the pattern. Whenever Ethan was nearby, the noise became softer. The ability that had followed him for years seemed to be fading. Nathaniel should have been worried. That power had always been part of his identity. But instead, he felt something he never expected: relief. For the first time, he wondered if losing the ability would actually mean losing something important. Maybe the thing he feared losing was the very thing preventing him from living normally. The next day, Nathaniel shared his concern with Ethan. "Something is changing," he said. Ethan looked at him carefully. "Your ability?" Nathaniel nodded. Ethan thought for a moment. "Maybe it is because you do not need it the same way anymore." Nathaniel looked at him silently. That simple explanation felt impossible, yet somehow true. For years, he believed hearing every thought was the only way to understand people. But Ethan was showing him another way. A way built on trust, patience, and choice. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Hayes was not afraid of the silence. He was beginning to understand that silence could also mean peace. For the first time in many years, Nathaniel Hayes faced a situation he could not predict. His ability had always given him answers before he needed to ask questions. It showed him hidden worries, unspoken feelings, and thoughts people tried to keep private. But now, standing beside Ethan Carter, Nathaniel was learning what it felt like to move forward without knowing everything. At first, the silence felt unfamiliar. The constant stream of thoughts around him had become softer, almost like distant sounds instead of an endless conversation. Nathaniel expected to feel uncertain, but instead, he felt lighter. Ethan noticed the change immediately. During their daily work at Hayes Corporation, Nathaniel seemed more present. He listened more carefully. He asked questions instead of assuming he already knew the answers. The CEO who once relied on knowing everything was learning how to simply be there. One afternoon, Ethan and Nathaniel reviewed the final details of the company project in the conference room. The team had achieved impressive results, but there was still one important decision left before the official release. Ethan looked over the documents and noticed Nathaniel becoming quiet. "Are you worried about the decision?" Ethan asked. Nathaniel looked at him. "Maybe I am." Ethan smiled slightly. "That is probably the first time I have heard you say that." Nathaniel looked surprised. "You make it sound unusual." "Because everyone thinks you always have the answer," Ethan replied. Nathaniel looked down at the documents. "I used to think I needed to." Ethan became quiet. He understood what Nathaniel meant. The CEO had spent years carrying the expectation of being perfect. But now, he was finally allowing someone to see that he was human. You know you do not have to know everything to make the right choice, Ethan said. Nathaniel looked at him. How did you learn that? Ethan smiled. I did not. I am still learning. The answer made Nathaniel laugh softly. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything. For years, Nathaniel believed strength came from always being certain. Ethan was showing him that real strength could also come from admitting uncertainty. As the final presentation approached, Nathaniel made a choice. He would no longer depend on his ability, even when it returned. He wanted to experience conversations without searching for hidden meanings. He wanted people to have the freedom to share what they truly felt. Most importantly, he wanted Ethan to trust him because of who he was, not because of something supernatural. During the final company meeting, Ethan presented the completed project with confidence. Nathaniel watched him from across the room. Months earlier, Ethan would have avoided speaking in front of senior leaders. Now, he stood confidently, explaining ideas that came from dedication and creativity. After the meeting ended, the team celebrated their success. Ethan walked beside Nathaniel through the quiet hallway. Do you ever miss knowing what everyone thinks? Ethan asked. Nathaniel considered the question. Sometimes I miss knowing the answer before asking the question. Ethan nodded. That makes sense. Nathaniel looked at him. But I do not miss feeling separated from everyone. Ethan smiled. Because now you actually have people who know you. Nathaniel stopped for a moment. Those words reminded him of how different his life had become. The ability that once defined him no longer controlled him. He was no longer the CEO who stood above everyone else, listening to a world that felt distant. He was simply Nathaniel, a person learning how to connect. Later that evening, Nathaniel and Ethan walked outside the building together. The city lights reflected across the streets, and the noise of the day slowly faded away. Nathaniel realized something important. He had spent years believing that knowing every hidden thought was the greatest advantage he had. But the truth was much simpler. The greatest connection came from giving someone the choice to be honest. And Ethan had chosen honesty every single time. Nathaniel did not need to hear every thought anymore. He only needed to trust the person walking beside him. For most of his life, Nathaniel Hayes believed that knowing the truth about people was the closest thing to understanding them. His ability allowed him to hear the thoughts hidden behind every conversation, every smile, and every carefully chosen word. But after meeting Ethan Carter, Nathaniel discovered a truth far more important than any thought he could hear. Real understanding came from trust. It came from giving someone the freedom to choose what they wanted to share. Months after Ethan joined the executive team, Hayes Corporation felt different. The company was still one of the most successful businesses in the country, and Nathaniel was still the respected CEO everyone recognized. But the person behind the title had changed. Employees noticed that he listened more. He took time to understand different perspectives. He no longer seemed like someone standing above everyone else. He seemed like someone finally allowing others to stand beside him. Ethan noticed the change more than anyone. One evening, after another successful project completion, Ethan and Nathaniel stood near the windows of the executive office. The city lights reflected across the glass, creating a peaceful moment after a long day. Do you remember when I first started here? Ethan asked. Nathaniel smiled slightly. You looked like you were trying not to make a single mistake. Ethan laughed softly. I probably was. Nathaniel looked at him. You were always more capable than you believed. Ethan became quiet for a moment. You know, I used to think people like you had everything figured out. Nathaniel looked toward the city. And now? Ethan smiled. Now I think you were just better at hiding what you felt. Those words stayed with Nathaniel. They were not something he discovered through his ability. They were something Ethan chose to tell him. That difference mattered more than anything. Nathaniel had spent years believing his power was what made him different. But Ethan showed him that being understood was not about someone knowing every secret. It was about someone caring enough to listen when you decided to speak. As time passed, Nathaniel's ability became less important in his daily life. He could still hear thoughts occasionally, but he no longer depended on them. He stopped searching for hidden meanings behind every conversation. Instead, he learned to trust the words people gave him. He learned to accept that uncertainty was not something to fear. It was part of every genuine connection. One afternoon, Ethan asked him a question while they walked through the company building. If you could choose, would you keep your ability forever? Nathaniel thought about the question carefully. Years ago, his answer would have been simple. He would have said yes. But now, everything was different. I think I would choose this, Nathaniel answered. Ethan looked curious. This? Nathaniel smiled. Being able to hear someone because they want me to hear them, not because I have to. Ethan smiled back. It was a simple answer, but it represented everything Nathaniel had learned. The powerful CEO who once depended on knowing every hidden thought had finally discovered the value of not knowing everything. Because mystery was not always a weakness. Sometimes, it was what allowed people to truly choose each other. On the anniversary of the project's success, Nathaniel and Ethan returned to the same conference room where their story had first begun. The room looked exactly the same, but they were different people. Ethan was no longer the young assistant who questioned whether he belonged. Nathaniel was no longer the CEO who believed distance was the only way to protect himself. They had both changed because they gave each other something neither of them expected. Ethan gave Nathaniel trust. Nathaniel gave Ethan the confidence to see his own value. As they left the building together, the evening lights surrounded the city. Nathaniel looked back at Hayes Corporation one last time and realized something important. He had spent his entire life listening to the world, searching for the truth hidden inside others. But the greatest truth he ever found was much simpler. The person who changed his life was not someone whose thoughts he could hear. It was someone who chose, every day, to let him in.